Lord's Supper this morning. And I want to especially thank Ryan for leading the songs today. That's wonderful. Now, I like to take scenic walks. And I would love it if someone would, offer a completely paid trip to some location anywhere in the world that I want to go. Of course, I'd want to take my wife with me. To go anywhere in the world for us to take a scenic walk somewhere. But if someone offered me a scenic walk like this, I think, no way am I going that way. And I want you to look at that. Look at that. Some people are crazy enough to take that scenic trail there. But I want you to think of that picture as I read these verses from the book of Proverbs. Do not set foot on the path of the wicked, or walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn from it and go on your way. I think a lot of people are on a trail like that. They just don't realize it. A trail, a path in this life that can be so harmful, so terrible for them. And just kind of blind to it. They're just walking along. For they cannot rest until they do evil. They are robbed of sleep till they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. I like that scene much better, don't you? And I think it kind of describes this. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of glory. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. What I'm doing, I'm just setting the foundation for the talk today. I plan to share with you what to do from the example of Jesus when we suffer a significant loss and when we see others in trouble and in danger of suffering a great loss themselves. Jesus suffered the great loss of his cousin, John the Baptist. And what did he do? What did he do when he heard that news? We see many examples of deep darkness, wickedness, violence, harm in the life of Herod Antipas. Jesus, he actually became discouraged. I mean, he was grieving over the loss of his cousin, John the Baptist. And this morning we want to look at how Jesus coped when he was grieving for that loss. To give us a background of the situation, we first start with John the Baptist, because it's in Matthew chapter 14. This is the whole context of the passage. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." We see some of his wickedness right here. He arrested John, which is abusive power, put him into prison because of Herodias. There was adultery involved in this. And it is not lawful for you to have, well, he's going to be selfish anyway. Selfishness. Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. So we see three more things here. We add to the list. There was malice. He wanted to kill John. There was cowardice. He was afraid of the people. And there was unbelief because he didn't believe that John was a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. So we see two more things added to this. There was lust, dance for the guests, and there was rashness. He made a promise that he ended up regretting. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed. But because of his oaths and his dinner guest, he ordered that her request be granted. And so we see that on a platter, the head of John the Baptist. We would add to that murder. Murder on his part. He had him beheaded in prison. His head was brought on a platter, given to the girl, carried it to her mother, and John's disciples came and they took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. Now I think we can all agree that this person looks like she's sad. She's sad. And people can be sad over the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of their health. It could be a job, a friend, many things. We can have that, experience that. And I think that sometimes whenever we have a loss like that and we're grieving, we might just want to be by ourselves. Go to a place, reflect upon the loss, probably sometimes mope about it, and maybe pray, hopefully pray. Can you imagine you're like that? You're going through that, and you just want to find a nice scenic hill. This is really scenic here, isn't it? And you just want to be by yourself, reflect on all, if it was a loved one, all that you had with that loved one. And to pray. And can you imagine being there in this solitary place, and then all of a sudden here comes 10 hikers, and they're joking, laughing, having fun, and they just stop not too far from you, and they decide it's about noon, it's time for a picnic. So what would you do? Well, you might get up and go elsewhere and just, again, try to be by yourself. Well, Jesus. When Jesus hears of the death of his cousin John the Baptist, he decides to get away by boat to a place where he can be by himself and pray. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. And then they went and told Jesus. And when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. But something changed his plans. The something was people. 5,000 men, not counting women and children. That changed his plans to be solitary, to be by himself. There they were. What's he to do? All of these people, they come. He's in the midst of grieving over the loss of John. And here they are. They're there. All of these people. And I think we see this proverb coming true. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter to the full light of glory. Jesus shines like the morning star, shining ever brighter when we see this and what happened. This miracle is not really that we're going to look at. It really is significant. I want to get rid of that not. It is significant because it is in all four gospel accounts. Matthew's account is the briefest. But Matthew says that when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Remember, he's in the midst of grieving. He's wanting to find a solitary place. He was grieving for the loss of John. But he's able to put his grief in the back of his mind and bring to the forefront of his mind compassion. He was affected by the misery, the pain, the suffering of the people that he saw, and his compassion went forth. He was affected by what he saw, and he wanted to heal them. He wanted to take their misery, their pain, their suffering away. They needed relief in him, and he gave it to them. What do you think he saw in these desperate people once he had healed them? I'm sure the faces were different. There was happiness, gladness. There was celebration. There were probably some who couldn't really get around well, and they were probably jumping up and down in excitement of what had happened. So we see that Jesus, his focus, when he is discouraged, he's grieving. And what does he do? He encourages. He encourages. If discouraged, well, let me go back. He encourages. Imagine yourself as one of the disciples. You see how Jesus cares for people. You want to care for people like him. You want to have the kind of compassion that Jesus has. You're right there with him and you see what he does. And it's just wonderful. You want to be like him. As evening approached, the disciples, they came to him and said, this is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. So you think of, you're there with Jesus, you think of an idea, it comes to your mind. Because you see, in all these people, and they're out there in a remote place, they're out there, and here they are, they come. Some of them are sick, some of them are curious, and they're going to become hungry. And they can see that. And so they have this idea, send them away so that they can be taken care of, so that they can buy their food that they need. And so this sounds like a really wise idea to me, focusing on the needs of others. And they come up with this idea, and that sounds like the wisdom from above. It sounds like the understanding that Jesus has. And I'm sure that when they came and they said that to Jesus, that he was delighted with their idea. Because they were showing concern for all of these people who were there. He has that kind of attitude about when he sees his disciples have the kind of compassion that he wants them to have and the care for others, that he's delighted. And the reason I'm saying this, there's so many passages that talks about this, as to why he would be delighted. One of them is Ephesians 2:10, where Paul writes, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And so this picture shows this football team helping older people in their community. And it was the idea that the coach decided that they had this big storm coming, and instead of having weightlifting practice that day, they were going to get their shovels out and do the weightlifting by doing that. And he said, just find someone in need in your area, in your community, and do it. And I think this was a special photo op here with all of these football players together. But they were doing that. And it really came from a tradition of this school in Pennsylvania. Jeff, the previous coach, had always had our kids do this, the new coach said. And anytime that we had a snow day and school was canceled, he had the kids go out and shovel driveways for people in the community who were elderly, disabled, or otherwise just couldn't shovel their own driveways. And so we see, what was the reaction of the response of these boys? Well, David, he was 16. He said, it was just the right thing to do. And it feels great to be able to help people who truly need it. And Aiden, he was 17, he agreed. He said it's genuinely a privilege to be able to hang out with your friends and have fun, while at the same time bringing a big difference to someone who would love to shovel their driveway, but can't for whatever reason. And so God says, blessed is the one who is kind to the needy. What is desirable in a man is kindness, is his kindness. Or a woman too, her kindness. And Paul, when he writes to the church at Thessalonica, he says, always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. And so I think that Jesus was delighted with his disciples coming and having that idea that they presented to him, because they were concerned about these people. So I think there's two things that we can learn so far from this. If you're discouraged, encourage. And secondly, think of the needs of others. help them. The disciples' idea was to send the crowds away. Send the crowds away so they could go to the villages and buy themselves some food. But Jesus changes their idea from go to the villages to get the food to you give it to them. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish, they answered. Well, bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Of course, this meant that they would go hungry because they only had 2 fish and 5 loaves. And if they had to supply the amount themselves, then according to the Luke passage of this very same event, 8 months' wages is what they thought it would take in order to feed all these people. And so it would have been costly. But imagine yourself standing there while Jesus, surrounded by thousands of people, takes this pitifully small amount of food, hardly enough for 2 people, let alone a crowd of thousands, and feeds thousands of people with it. The disciples are about to see something amazing, an act of kindness so extraordinary you couldn't even imagine it. But what would we call that? A miracle. Jesus performed a miracle here. Notice the sequence of what he does. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven. He gave thanks. He gave thanks. And broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. So he takes the small amount that has been given to him, the 2 fish, the 5 loaves, and he has it. So in a sense, you can count your blessings. No matter if there are many of them or few, you still count them. And then what's he done? He looks up into heaven and he gives thanks for them. And then share what you have with others. And so again, we put it in this way, in this diagram. Count your blessings, give thanks for them, and share. So that's the sequence. You count your blessings, you give thanks for those blessings, and you share what you have with others. Now, a great mistake is to do nothing because you can only do a little. It's tempting because you have so little to do nothing. But Jesus took what little they had and multiplied it. And when we have blessings from God, Jesus can use those blessings to help others through us. And it all starts with giving thanks to God for what we have. It starts small. Jesus told them another parable about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The man took and planted in his field. And though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants. It becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches. So it starts small. And I like these similar insights. Thinking about it starts small. Victory is won not in miles, but in inches. Win a little now, hold your ground, and later win a lot more. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble. Jesus says this, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And so we need to take whatever it is and look at it as, and whatever the service we might be giving, as a small task, but take it and look at it as something great and noble. And then we can handle bigger things too. So, if discouraged, encourage. Think about the needs of others. Commit your resources to Jesus, however many or however few they are. Count your blessings, give thanks, and share. So they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Gathering up all the leftovers demonstrates that they should not neglect what God has also provided, or already provided. And we should also learn from this to use the blessings that God provides to us. Use them for service in helping others. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Remember, when all of this happened, it's when he heard what had happened to John the Baptist, his cousin. This is when this all happened. He got in that boat. He decided to get away by boat to a place where he could be alone. But instead, he heals the sick, teaches, feeds the hungry. And now after he dismisses the crowd, he has the opportunity to be by himself and pray, because he's still grieving over the loss of John. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. What Jesus did when grieving brings me to a bulletin article I wrote. It was about this guy. He was out in California by the coast, and he's riding down a bike lane in his bicycle. And someone comes up, and he's looking at the waves, really enjoying them, and he veers into the bicycle lane, and he hits the guy, sending him into the air 30 feet. He stops, calls 911, and stays there with other people. And he discovers later the extent of this man's injuries. The hospital report said a fractured back, broken pelvis, torn knee ligaments, bruised intestines, and 2 brain blood clots. And the bicyclist spends 33 days in the hospital on his road to recovery. After 8 months, he's still rehabilitating. And so there's much more to the story. The good news is he recovers. And it's characterized by his attitude. This man and his wife could easily have been bitter and unforgiving. But instead, words like forgiving, kind, considerate, friendly, they describe them, this husband and wife. And he says, I think if people can understand that, then people would learn to forgive. Understand about forgiveness. To forgive, because forgiveness is a big part about your own mental and physical health. And after Tom had stayed 5 days in the hospital, his wife Jeanette found Keith, the driver, his number, and sent him a text. Hey, this is Tom's wife Jeanette, the guy you hit. We've been trying to get a hold of you. We've been praying for you, and we just want you to know that he's okay. So this couple is grieving. Her husband suffered a fractured back, broken pelvis, torn knee ligaments, bruised intestines, 2 brain blood clots. They're grieving. And they're discouraged. And yet, who are they reaching out to with concern? To the man who hit her husband. They're discouraged. But they want to encourage. And so he was surprised to receive the text. And they invited him to visit in the hospital. They struck up a friendship. Keith has tried to help around their house with carpentry work. And Tom has now gone from wheelchair to a walker and now to a cane. And Tom had out-of-pocket expenses of $7,000, and Keith came up with a GoFundMe page that came up with $8,000, so it covered all those expenses. So again, what can we say? What does God say to us? Blessed are those who are kind to the needy. And what is desirable in a man is his kindness. And always try to be kind to everyone, to each other, and to everyone else. And here's the proverb: whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. So the path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter to the full light of day. So how did Jesus cope with his grief? Yes, he wanted to be by himself. He wanted to be with God. He wanted to pray. But in the meantime, he saw other people in need, and he had compassion for them. And his heart went out to he was affected by their misery and their suffering. And he wanted to heal them. And we also see that he could see eventually their hunger. And so we learn from him in all of this to count our blessings, to give thanks to those blessings, and to share them with others. So what an example Jesus is for us. Let's strive to follow in his steps. If you're subject to the invitation of Jesus this morning, if you've never met him in the waters of baptism, where he meets you as your master, your Savior, and washes your sins away, or whatever might be your need this morning, won't you come as we stand?